And with me today, I am greeted by the lovely Kelly Schermerhorn, who is a marketing leader and advocate for empathetic leadership, mental health awareness, and redefining success. With a background in high performance roles, Kelly has navigated the challenges of balancing career ambitions with personal well-being. After stepping back from direct team management to focus on creativity and flexibility, she focused I discovered a renewed sense of purpose and improved quality of life. Passionate about leading with empathy, particularly in the healthcare space, Kelly believes in creating workplaces where employees feel supported. Her personal journey with mental health, including overcoming periods of depression and isolation, has inspired her to share practical strategies for building resilience and following one's curiosity. Welcome to the show, Kelly. It's so great to have you here.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. I'm just sitting here blushing at that introduction, and I'm humbled to be here.
Oh no, it's really lovely to have you. And yeah, I'm really excited to get, stuck into your personal journey as well as, what you're doing today. It'd be great for you to kind of talk more about, your own journey, and can you share what initially drove you to redefining your career success and to prioritize mental health?
Yes, goodness, what a great question. I first identify as a professional, although that's changing. So, I've been in the corporate workforce as a marketer for, golly, over 15 years now. And the reason I start with saying that is that for most of my adulthood, I looked to define my identity by my career titles and by climbing that corporate ladder. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I found that there's a lot more worth in myself than just my title at work. And I'll say that I came to that conclusion the hard way. And that is really what started my avocation around mental health is that, and we can dive more into this, but I actually experienced a major mental health episode that took me out of the workplace for 7 weeks. And during that period, I was faced with time. And when you're when you have time, you actually slow down to look inward, or at least that was the invitation I had. And that's what's brought me forward, we'll say. So well, I'll just start there.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. So, because normally, I don't know about in the States, but in the UK, they give you t like 2 weeks of stress leave, for example. But so to have actually have 7 weeks, that must have been something quite severe. Were you diagnosed with anything?
What happened is, I ultimately found out that I have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. But what happened that contributed to my 7 weeks out of office is I actually had no idea what was happening with me, right? So I had actually started into what's called a manic episode, but I didn't know what was happening with me. So part of that time off was actually getting connected with the type of care I needed. And what I mean by that is part of a manic episode includes suicidal thoughts and safety to yourself, as well as could be others. It was a very scary period. And so I knew I needed to get to a facility that would help keep me safe and also help me identify what was going on. And the reason I shared that part of the journey is that, like I said, I didn't know what was going on with me. So, for a number of factors, I talk about mental health today, but part of it is because I think we need awareness on the things that we experience. Because had I talked about mental health more in my life, at that point in time, I might have had an earlier diagnosis and I might not have had to go through the very scary 7 weeks that I did.
Oh, yeah, very interesting. So, I mean, you don't have to share everything, but what kind of symptoms did you actually experience? Why was it so scary?
Yeah, and I'm happy to share because again, I think this is part of reducing the stigma around mental health. So with again what I call my headlining diagnosis, which is bipolar, with a manic episode, which you can find, all of this documented online. But some of the key symptoms during a manic episode are elevated excitement, very excited, which, at first was fine with me. I was on top of the world. Everything was great. That's why I didn't know anything was wrong. But what that turned into is not being able to turn off my brain, not being able to sleep. And that started off as scary because when you're running nonstop in your brain and physically, it starts to hurt, right? Like it hurts on the inside. Like you can't figure out how to turn it off, yet your body is tired. So that's why I say it hurts because it's a weird type of hurt. We often only think about physical hurt or maybe emotional hurt, but this was a weird combination. The lack of sleep ended up leading to I'd say one of the factors was a hallucination. For anyone who's ever faced a hallucination or what could, I think other people call, psychosis, it's incredibly scary because hallucinations feel real. And I had a very dark and scary hallucination. And then, like I said, the suicidal thoughts. So for me, and again, I'm fine with talking about this because I think that people are afraid to talk about this. And you need to have awareness, and we need to make these discussions normalized so that people feel okay talking about suicidal thoughts. And what happened for me is I'd say there's a scale, right? So what I was having was suicidal ideation. An example of that is in the US, I don't know how it is other places, but if there's a road that doesn't actually lead anywhere. Maybe it's like a circle in a neighborhood. It's labeled as a dead end. So there's a sign that says dead end. So there's a neighborhood that I frequently go to that has had that sign forever, right? It's that sign has always been there. It's always said dead end. But suddenly when I was going to that neighborhood during this period of mania, it was almost like the sign was screaming at me, dead, dead, dead. And it was scary. And like I knew that sign had always been there, but it was like, why was it speaking so loudly to me? So those are some of the unique experiences that I had in mania. Again, I think you can read, and there are some similarities of other people experiencing that. But like I said, I do just want to go back to talking about suicide and suicide ideation because one of the things that helped me realize that I wasn't okay and needed to take time off from work is I had a friend that said, "Are you thinking about suicide?" And I was like, "What? No, I hadn't even thought of it." But she then told me that if it did ever occur to me that I could call her in the middle of the night, she would answer her phone. And it was such a normal conversation. I'll never forget it because it actually signaled to me that I was not okay. And that's when I actually stepped away from work and started to try to figure things out. So I just want to say, let's normalize that.
Yeah. Oh wow. No, that is, and it's a real, it is a tough subject to hit, especially when it's something very personal to you. And I know, a lot of people, they just have a lot of shame around it as well. Thinking, oh, selfish to feel that way. But like you said, the feelings are, they're just part of, whatever we're going through at the time. And there's, we shouldn't be ashamed. We should be owning it and to, talk more about it to help others as well. So what was it? Was it a high pressurized role that you had that drove you to these thoughts? And was it anxiety and stress that you also had?
Question. So when I experienced my manic episode, it was during a high pressure period uh, at work. However, so I do think it was a perfect stress storm, and there was things going on in the world. There was things going on in my family, stressors, and it was a perfect storm of stress. But I would say that what was revealed to me in my periods of reflection over those 7 weeks is when you keep something inside, many of us might have big T trauma or little T trauma. And if you don't ever recognize that trauma yourself, you hide it deep within, it will come out. And I think that's in part what happened to me is just some things that have happened in my history. And also things that have happened in my history led to a mindset of perfectionism, right? Always having to show up, being perfect, being that ladder climber in the workforce, showcasing myself with my titles in the workplace. But that was a form of hiding, right? Just a different form of hiding. And so again, part of what I do today in advocating so transparently and vulnerably with my own stories on mental health is because I have to continue to walk a path of no longer hiding. And I guess for me, that means being really vulnerable, but it's really an invitation for other people to be vulnerable too.
Yeah. Yeah, vulnerability is strength, and it's something which I've been so prominent about, especially in my, during my podcasting as well, because, we need to be sharing our stories, because by just suppressing it and holding it in, it's only going to make things worse and lead to other complications. And so, yeah, I think that's really important. So just thinking about, people who may be listening to this episode right now, who may be stuck in a very high pressurized role in their jobs. Is there any kind of words of wisdom that you'd give to them right now?
Well, the first thing that popped into my brain is permission.
Mm.
So oftentimes we get into high performing roles because, again, we expect a lot out of ourselves, which makes us really great performers, but we don't often give ourselves permission to rest or permission to say no. And so, again, as somebody who is a recovering perfectionist, I also identify as a recovering people pleaser. And what I mean by that is if you're in a high performance role, you've probably said yes, maybe a fair amount in your career, right? Wanting to please others, get to that point. But I like to practice a yes and. And what that actually leads to is a no. So let's just say you're in a high pressure job or high performance job, and somebody asks you to turn something around in 24 hours. Yes, I hear that you need this 24 hours from now. And I'd love to do that. But in order to do that with meeting my current deadlines and give you the quality that you need, it will take me until X date. Maybe it's a week later, right? And so that's giving yourself permission to say no, but still, like, you can still be positive about it. That's why I say the yes and. And it's giving yourself permission, those boundaries to find rest, because maybe you would have tried to turn that around in 24 hours and sacrifice something important like sleep, right? I have learned the importance of sleep after that manic episode that I went through. So I think permission is something that we don't think to give ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's fantastic advice. Thank you. And what does leading with empathy look like in the workplace, especially in the healthcare industry?
Again, great question. When I think of leading with empathy, the first person that comes to mind is actually my current boss. And what that means is, so again, I've shared that I have a bipolar diagnosis. That also comes with periods of depression. And so how that shows up at work now is that I might be a little bit quieter during team meetings, whereas you can see I'm otherwise a very
Mhm.
engaged person, collaborating, sharing ideas, but sometimes I'm a little bit quieter. And my boss checked in with me and said, just wanted to make sure that you're doing okay. And then she followed up and said, I want to know how I can help you. That is an example of empathy because she wasn't judging me for not otherwise being myself. And she wanted to understand from my perspective what I needed. And in that was an invitation, right, to tell her what I needed. And that helped me reflect on what my needs were. So again, it created a whole cycle. So that's an example from leading with empathy from a personal perspective. When I think about healthcare and empathy, I work for a technology company, and technology can feel very cold and hard, but working in the healthcare industry. So in the US, you can call into, we have private health insurance. And so you can call into a health insurance company and they'll ask you your name and everything. Well, technology could actually help record, that information for the person on the phone, right? Like the representative, so that that representative is actually freed up to listen
Mm.
to the patient on the phone, to actually listen and hear. Maybe there's panic in their voice.
Mhm.
Maybe they're sad, right? And so now the person on the line is freed up to actually respond in an empathetic way. And so healthcare is always moving so fast. Yes, technology is involved, but I just want to always remind people that there's humans in healthcare and that humans have the ability to be empathetic, but sometimes we're all in a rush that we forget to do that.
We do, yes. Yeah, so true. God, and the amount of times, that I mean, I'm also guilty of it as well, just being stuck in my own head that, I'm not even aware of the surroundings because it's always like, oh my God, I've got to get to school in time, to drop off my little boy and and
Yeah.
it's difficult, isn't it, to just actually be aware of, what's going on around you.
It is. It's very difficult. And like you said, especially we're all dealing and navigating with our own things or responsibilities throughout our day, like being a parent, your work, maybe being a caregiver for somebody else in your family, or just being a good friend. We don't know what those stressors are, what other people are managing. So I appreciate what you said because we're all human.
Yeah,
We do
exactly.
the best we can.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, amazing. Yeah. So, what strategies have you actually found most helpful for managing periods of depression and isolation?
Yes. Oh, gosh. Managing depression is not easy. For anybody who's ever faced depression, it's not one of those things where you can just say, snap out of it. Depression doesn't work that way, as I've experienced. However, understanding that depression happens is one way to give yourself grace. Meaning, what doesn't work, and a strategy, if you will, is not to further belittle yourself. So, when I've gone through depressive episodes, as somebody who previously found value in my productivity, identified my self-worth and how productive I was, I used to shame myself during my periods of depression and think, why can't I just get off the couch? Why can't I be doing more? Uh, and what I was essentially doing is digging the hole deeper, right? I was already not feeling well, being depressed, and I was almost keeping myself still instead of just observing. Okay, so now when I go through a depressive episode or phase, I just recognize, okay, I'm I'm a little bit quieter this week. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's how it is.
Mhm.
There's no rhyme or reason, maybe. And it's just observing. It's like fall where I am on the East Coast in the US, leaves are falling off the trees. And I don't judge that leaf for falling, right? In fact, I think it's beautiful when the leaves fall. And so I
Mm.
think about depression as the same way. One of my biggest strategies is to stop judging myself. And I actually think that's a very helpful clue for others, whether people have family members and they're depressed or a friend. It's really hard to understand what that person's going through. Sometimes you say, "Oh, just snap out of it because it's uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable to watch somebody who's depressed, and you really do just want them to get better." And so you think by encouraging them in that way, it'll motivate them, or maybe you personally watching that person depressed, you feel helpless. But it's nobody's fault sometimes when depression helps. So again, just standing by, not shaming, like we talked about before, but just standing by in support is another good strategy for someone who's not depressed, but maybe is around somebody who's depressed.
Yeah, yeah. So it's the power of community and just having, support, and it's just having that one person who, you can just pick up the phone and just have a non-judgmental conversation with. It just can make such a world of a difference. And it's something which I guess, a lot of people may lack because they're not in those kind of surroundings.
Yeah,
So I
I
suppose,
would actually love to add to that because I can't emphasize enough what you just said about being able to pick up the phone and have a conversation without any judgment. In fact, the reason I find this so important is I just had a discussion like this at work the other day. I was actually part of a group that was called Circles for Disability Inclusion. And the focus of that circle was on psychosocial safety. And then there was no agenda, right? We just showed up to the call because we all have some sort of, psychosocial challenge, such as depression, anxiety, ADHD, bipolar. And we just came together as a community and we just shared whatever was on our mind. But during that call, people actually shared that they felt safer at work disclosing their disability that's associated with their mental health than they did elsewhere. And so I think it's really interesting that dynamic in the workplace because so many of us spend more of our waking hours at work than anywhere else in our lives. And so I challenge workplaces, specifically in the US and internationally, to really be part of the change in making and reducing that mental health stigma, starting in the workplace. Like, imagine that. I just think it's super exciting if we think about focusing the conversation there.
oh wow, it would be. I think so too. Wow. But I know that, there's a long way to go for a lot of the organizations, where budgets may be constricted and yeah, so it's just, I guess it's for them, it's the best use of resource, isn't it? I mean, in my eyes, mental health is the best use of resource because, if they've got healthy employees, then ultimately that's going to lead to a successful business overall and more profits because people are going to be wanting to, work harder and make more sales. So
Exactly.
yeah, so oh well. Let's see where, what happens during these times. And I also want to talk a bit about family and work-life balance because I know this is something that you've also managed to you know, really work on in your favor. So how did you manage that, and what advice would you give to others who may be struggling to set boundaries between work and personal life?
Yes, it is something I've made progress in. As I mentioned, I really found my identity in my career. And, I'm sad to say that at points in my life, I think I prioritized that over my family. I would be more worried about being late to a meeting than to dropping my son off at school. And that led to me being a very frantic, high anxiety mom because I was placing my value in the wrong place. Again, that self-worth and trying to define myself through accolades that I achieved through work instead of just being who I am and finding love in myself just as who I am as I was born. And so my biggest advice is to find that value in yourself. And if you're a parent, that will help your parenting, right? For me, by finding that in myself, I was able to relax on the prioritization I was putting on work and prioritize my family. Now, that actually doesn't mean that I'm any less of a productive employee. I'm actually still considered a high performer, but I've found the balance in my life better. And so I can easily say, I'm going to prioritize picking my son up from school because that's what's important to me, right? It's different for everybody, but that's something that's important for me. And I block my work calendar because, again, I'm not defining my success based on how many meetings I attend or how many people I make happy at work. It's okay to give myself that permission to set the boundary during the hours of my school pickup for my son. And so that's one small example of finding balance, but I didn't do that before. And once you find balance in one way like that, I think it leads to momentum throughout, right? So again, for some people, they find that they work best after hours in the evening. But for me, that's a time that I like to dedicate to my family. And now that I'm not holding myself to as high of standards at work as a way of defining myself, I can find that balance.
Amazing that, yeah. And just out of curiosity, how did you manage to block out the time? Because I know a lot of workforces are quite strict with the hours that you work. Was this something that that you all had already discussed with them, that that you have a child and you have to be present for school runs? So was it just having that open communication with them?
Yes, that is a really good question because every workplace is different. Not only each company uniquely, but wherever you are in the world can be different. And so one, yes, always a conversation with your leader. Again, that starts from you identifying what's important to you and being vulnerable enough to have that conversation. And maybe your company or your leader won't say that you can take the time off, but you'll never know unless you're willing to have the conversation. So I say start there. I am very fortunate that I work for an organization that values balancing workload and personal life. So certainly those privileges are often only given if you are meeting your performance objectives. But again, when you have that balance, people more naturally meet their performance outcomes, right? Because they're given that balance and that flexibility to work at their best because they're not as stressed about parenthood. Now, don't get me wrong, us parents are always going to have certain stressors, but you can find balance in different ways, like reducing a little bit of mom guilt if you want to be there to pick up your child from school. The other thing is I literally block off time on my work calendar, my work diary. And so I protect that time to say that I'm out of the office so that people don't schedule meetings during that time. Now I'm flexible. Sometimes I do have to take a meeting via a phone call in the car, but I try not to because I want to be present for my son and say hi when I pick him up from
Yeah.
school. But yes, have the conversation.
Mm. Oh, amazing. Thank you. Yeah, fantastic. And so you log your motivation, don't you? Is that
I do. I've actually, this is something I started doing recently. So there's lots of studies out there that encourage people to journal or to have a gratitude practice, which I have done historically. But something new for me is I have been very excited about the release of generative AI. I specifically use ChatGPT. It's free. So I like that. And I actually log the different things that motivate me or discourage me, or maybe I procrastinate on. And I log this with ChatGPT because ChatGPT, as an example of generative AI, can actually respond and reflect back to me
Mm.
the things that I am motivated by, and then things that aren't as motivating to me. And then I can work together with the Gen AI to actually identify tips for how to find the motivation to do those things that maybe, aren't the most exciting parts of our job.
Oh, I love that. What a fantastic idea. Thank you.
It's just something I started doing. I think we all have awareness about the things we like to do or what we don't like to do. But sometimes when you're living it, it's hard to step back and really reflect on the big picture.
Mm.
And so I found it really helpful just to use Gen AI in that way. It's more of an observational tool that can help us with a larger, broader reflection.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So yeah, so what do you hope is the one thing that listeners take away from you this episode today?
Listeners take away being vulnerable,
Yeah.
right? I call myself a mental health vulnerability advocate because we can't make progress in reducing the stigma around mental health unless we open the doors to conversation. And that means being vulnerable. It's hard to share your story. It's even harder to openly talk about mental health. But that is one way we can reduce the stigma. And more importantly, it's a way that we can all be there for each other. As if you share, then it allows other people to surround you in that community, just like you said. And this is a great demonstration of vulnerability and just allowing me to have this conversation with you and your listeners.
Oh, no, thank you so much for sharing it and for being vulnerable. It's been an absolute honor hearing about your journey. And so, where can my listeners find you?
Yes, well, I am most active on LinkedIn. As I've talked a lot about here, I believe that mental health stigma can be reduced in the workplace, and a lot of professionals are on LinkedIn. So that it's the primary place to find me. I have a few other guest episodes on podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, but I would say find me on LinkedIn.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, and I'll be adding your link into this podcast episode so everyone can connect with you.
Very
Amazing.
good.
And again, thank you so much for your time today, Kelly. I've loved having you on.
It was an absolute pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Thank you. And my beautiful listeners, that's all we have time for today. I hope you enjoyed the show and please do connect with Kelly. I'm sure she would love to hear from you. And until the next episode, take care, my friends. Stay blessed, and I'll see you next time.